Hi, everyone. Welcome so much to the Ideas for Us podcast in YouTube. We are here. My name is Lee Perry, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer of Ideas for Us. Really excited to invite our guest, Chuck O'Neill, to speak on the Right to Clean Water Act. Here in Florida, in this upcoming election in November, there's going to be this really incredible opportunity to, give our water bodies a right to be clean and to be free of pollution. So with that being said, I'd love to go ahead and invite Chuck to introduce himself before talking about this upcoming charter amendment in November. Hi, Chuck. Welcome.
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. And it's such a pleasure to talk about this charter amendment that will be the first of its kind in the state of Florida, and also the first time that a county has considered this as far as a charter amendment. So when we say vote yes to the right to clean water, Charter Amendment 1, let me just go into a little brief synopsis of what that means. Orange County has, along with 20 other counties in Florida, has kind of its own constitution. It's called a charter. And back in 1968, when Florida voted on creating a new constitution, they included this provision that counties could have their own charter, that gives them the right to kind of form their own constitution and change that constitution, just like we have the Bill of Rights in the US Constitution that were changes to the original Constitution. We also can change our charter in Orange County. And that's done one of three ways. The voters of Orange County can vote on a charter amendment that's placed there by citizens initiatives, which is very difficult. You have to get over 100,000 signatures to get something on the ballot that way. The county commission can put a charter amendment on the ballot. Or the third way, and the way that we're seeing this happen, is through a charter review commission. Every 4 years, a 15-member panel that's appointed by the county commission researches and discusses and refines, with help of legal staff, a charter amendment slate. And those charter amendments are voted on by the 15-member Charter Review Commission. So we proposed this particular charter amendment back in June of 2019. And the Charter Review Commission decided, yes, let's study that. We went through 11 meetings. And I'm a guy, and so I've never given birth before, but that is pretty much what the process was like. It was giving birth. It was that painful. There are a lot of people came in and discussed, and things should be this way, things should be that way. The attorney said, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. So after 11 meetings, they came up with the final version of the charter amendment. And this had to go through two separate votes. So it was voted on in February and passed the first reading. And then on March 4th, it was voted on again and passed the second reading. So the exact language that you're going to be seeing on the ballot on November 3rd in the general election is the language that was developed by this Charter Review Commission and voted on by the Charter Review Commission. So they voted, they said, yes, let's send this to the citizens of Orange County. And it was transmitted recently, early June, to the Bill Cowles, Supervisor of Elections. So let's start to go through and see what the basis is. Let's start with why are we even doing this, and what's it all about? All right, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is a picture of the planet Earth. And, people say, oh, there's water everywhere. It covers 75% of the earth. Well, it's not really that plentiful. Of all the planets that are out there in our solar system, we're the only one that really has water. And when we look for life and we send spacecraft through the universe looking for life, the first thing they're looking for is water, because this is the most essential element to human life, to any life for that matter. So that if you look on this picture, the largest globe there is all the water on the face on the entire planet Earth. So if you were to take all the water and you put it into one sphere, that sphere would be about 863 miles wide. So that's all the water on Earth. Now, if you can even see it, and you look about where Atlanta is, there's a smaller dot, and that's all the fresh water on Earth. That's all the groundwater and rivers combined on Earth. And that's about 169 miles wide. And then just southeast of that, there's an even tinier dot. You may not even be able to see it, but that's all the fresh water that's available to humans to drink. That's all the accessible fresh water that's in rivers and in underground aquifers that's available for us to drink. And that's only 35 miles wide. So I always like to start with this slide to give you a perspective of why water is so important. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of Wekiva Springs. And the reason why we start with Wekiva is because the Wekiva Springs is actually in Orange County. A lot of people think that Wekiva Springs is in Seminole County, but it isn't. And so this is very important for us to realize is that this is us. This is a very important source of water in Orange County, and one that we must guard and protect. Next slide, please. Now, this slide is kind of a fun slide. Imagine if we're all in that swimming pool. That's a standard 30,000 gallon swimming pool. And so everybody who's watching the podcast today, you, me, Lee, Ernest, we're all in this swimming pool. And we're just having a good old time. And then I go over to the septic tank over to the right there and take off the lid, and I take a 1 gallon jug and I dip that into the septic tank, and then I come over and pour it into the pool. Now, how many people would stay in the pool with that 1 gallon of water floating in there? Well, some people might come out, some people might stay in. Well, what if I take 10 gallons of that septic tank water and dump it in the pool? Would everybody still stay in there? That's the point that people normally say, that's it. There's no way I would swim in that water whatsoever. I'm getting out of that pool. Well, the nitrate concentration in Wekiva Springs is equal to that pool plus 750 gallons of septic tank water mixed in. So that gives you an idea of the cleanliness of the water in Wekiva Springs. And it's not just Wekiva Springs. It's about the same as the water in the Wekiva River and the Econ-Lockhatchee River. Next slide, please. So what does all that nitrate do? It gets into the water and it feeds the growth of algae. And that algae builds up, as you can see on the bottom of this shot of the river, it builds up on the eelgrass. And because it's on the eelgrass, it covers the eelgrass and blocks it out from light. And works to kill the eelgrass. Well, why is eelgrass so important? Eelgrass is where the fish lay their eggs. So if we have no eelgrass, then it reduces the population of fish. The entire water system becomes unhealthy. The presence of that level of nitrates in the water is in and of itself harmful for fish and any kind of life, aquatic life or human life. Next slide, please. Now, this gives you another demonstration of the quality of water in the Wekiva River and the Econlockhatchee River. They tell pregnant women, don't eat hot dogs because they're loaded with nitrates. Don't eat hot dogs. Don't eat one hot dog because it's not healthy. And when they say it's not healthy, it's because when the nitrates and nitrites are put into the body of a baby, the system, the breathing system, the respiratory system of a baby breaks down, and they get what's called blue baby syndrome, which is deadly. So if you were to take a glass of water and dip it into the Wekiva River at any point, it's the equivalent, and drink that water, it's the equivalent of eating 2 hot dogs worth of nitrates. Next slide, please. So this is a graph of the nitrate level in the Wekiva River. And if you see on the y-axis over here to the left, that is the nitrate level when they do the sampling of the river, and that the safe level of nitrates in the river is 0.286. So that's way down at the bottom of this graph. So that the blue line that shows what the nitrate levels are when they do the testing, it's 3 to 4 times the level of nitrates that it should be in the river, maximum level of nitrates to promote healthy life, healthy fish, and healthy people. Next slide, please. And this is the Econlockhatchee River. Again, the TMDL, the total maximum daily load, is 0.286 of nitrate. And you can see the river is almost always in excess, 3 to 4 times in excess of the safe level of nitrates in the river. Next slide, please. So what are nitrates doing to the rivers and the springs? These are some photos by John Moran that show the same spring in the early 90s versus today in this decade. So let's show these slides here. Next slide, please. All right, you can see the green on the slide on the right, and how the nitrates are starting to choke out the natural life. Next slide, please. And this is Levy Blue Springs in 1992 and 2011. You can just tell by the quality of the water what's happened over the course of just a couple decades. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting slide. It shows you where the water is coming from that comes out of Wekiva Springs. This is what's known as the spring shed. So when rain falls, or somebody takes a garden hose and puts it on the ground, or somebody dumps wastewater anywhere within this shape, this teardrop shape, and that's Lake Apopka in the center, just to give you some kind of frame of reference. That filters down through the soil into the upper Floridan aquifer, and then moves northeast. So that's kind of the hill, and the water, when it runs in, it runs downhill, so to speak, in the aquifer, and exits at the lowest points. And the lowest points are what we know as springs. Those are kind of the punch holes in the aquifer that lets the water out. So anything that goes on the ground in that spring shed is moving towards the springs and it exits the springs and becomes part of the Wekiva River. So things like, if you see just south of Lake Apopka, there's some red areas. Those are the rapid infiltration basins where the wastewater from much of West Orange County and the city of Orlando comes out and enters into the upper Floridan aquifer. That's a facility known as Water Conserve 2. And why that's important is if the water that's in the wastewater for the city of Orlando and West Orange County is high in nitrates, when it's piped out there in a 54-inch diameter pipe, and then it's spread to homeowners who want reuse water for their lawns, and it's also sent to orange groves, what orange groves are left. And then what they don't use gets dumped into rapid infiltration basins, which are these large sandy pits. And that water goes into those sandy pits and it drains down into the upper Floridan aquifer and moves towards the springs. Next slide, please. This gives you an example of what's going on, so that you have what's going on the surface, which is a dairy, you have a city, and you have the water that's being used in that city. When it enters the ground, some of it goes into streams, but some of it in that area goes down into the upper Floridan aquifer. That is this big piece of limestone Swiss cheese under all of us. That's where this water ends up. Next slide, please. So what causes the water in the aquifer that's exiting into Wekiva Springs, into the Wekiva River? What's causing that to be high in nitrate? Well, one of the things that's causing it to be high in nitrates are septic tanks. And septic tanks collect the wastewater from a house, and then it sends it out into a drain field where it drains down. As you can see in the drawing, it drains down into the aquifer. And you say, well, okay, spring water is dirty. What does that mean to me? Well, it means a lot to you because you're drinking it. Public wells go into that water. Individual private wells go into that water. And, we're all essentially drinking what's coming out of the springs. Next slide, please. Also, fertilizer. And I know, Lee, you've worked on this extensively. When you fertilize lawns, and especially when you over-fertilize lawns, the fertilizers also are heavy in nitrates and phosphates, and they drain down into the aquifer as well. Next slide, please. Commercial agricultural fertilizers also are a big problem. They, when you over fertilize, that ends up in the springs and goes down into the aquifer and moves. It goes into the aquifer and moves towards the springs. Next slide, please. And then these are the rapid infiltration basins at Water Conserve 2. You can see those sandy pits. That's where the wastewater from the city of Orlando and West Orange County ends up. Well, it doesn't end there because it drains down through those sandy pits into the upper Floridan aquifer and moves to the springs. Next slide, please. So this is a chart that shows about what portion of what source ends up coming out of the springs. And you see over 90% of the nitrates that are going into the upper Floridan aquifer are coming from those four sources that we just mentioned. Next slide. This is a cutaway. It kind of shows the state of Florida and why it's important to preserve fresh water. Originally, the entire state was underwater, and then tens of thousands of years ago, the oceans receded, the polar ice caps froze up, and the water went down. And as that did, rain hit the land on Florida, and it developed this, what we call the freshwater lens, this conical shape of fresh water that we all drink out of. That's a well there. So it's important to preserve that freshwater lens. This is what keeps us alive here in Central Florida. Otherwise, we're going to get to the point where we all have to drink desalinated water straight out of the salty portion of the aquifer, the very lowest portion of the aquifer. Next slide, please. So what is WEBOR? WEBOR is the start of the what we call the right to clean water in Orange County. It was the Wekiva and the Econ-Lockhatchee River Bill of Rights. And what's all that about? Next slide, please. It started out with a simple proposition. And for that, we're going to have to digress a little bit and go back to when this country was founded. When the Western immigrants came to the United States from Western Europe, they brought with them a system of law that the English law, common law system, and that is pretty much what we have today. Now, in the English common law, you're one of two things. You're either a person or you're a thing. If you're a person, then you have rights. You have rights, you have civil rights, you have a right to own property, a right to vote, you have right to speak, you have your First Amendment rights. Persons have those things, but things don't have rights. So during the course of our formation and when the Constitution was written, they gave rights to men. And what did they mean by all men? All men are created equal. Well, they meant white men, for the most part, are created equal. But they did not include in that system of rights, they did not include people of color. They did not include women. These were not rights-bearing persons when the country was started. And over time, our law has evolved. It has evolved such that we abolished slavery. Slavery where a slave was a thing. It wasn't a person, it was a thing under law. And it was a horrible episode in American history. And we have evolved and continue to evolve. And I don't even need to tell you about recent events, how we're still evolving to the point where every person has equal rights. Same with women. In the prior to the 1870s, women were things. They were property of their husbands, and if they weren't married, their eldest male living relative. They were property. And over the course of time, we have evolved. We have evolved to the point through the early 1900s, 1920, when women got the right to vote. These are evolutionary things. So when we talk about giving certain rights to a river, we're talking about giving rights, not the rights of personhood, but let me read to you from the ballot proposal of exactly what you're going to see in November. We're talking about the Wekiva River, the Econ-Lockhatchee River, and as it was expanded during the the Charter Review Commission process, all other waters within the boundaries of Orange County have the right to exist, flow, to be protected against pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. So this is what this charter amendment, this gets down to the heart of the charter amendment, what it's doing. It is bestowing rights, these four rights: the right to exist, the right to flow, that's to have sufficient water to maintain a healthy river, the right to be protected against pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. So this is the nutshell of the amendment, this in the second section. Let's go to that section now. Next slide, please. Okay, this is talking about the rights of people. And this is where we get to the right to clean water. It says all citizens of Orange County have a right to clean water by having the waters of Orange County protected against pollution. So this would give individuals in Orange County the right to have clean water. And I know some people say, well, this is ludicrous. How is this possible that we have to vote on this? Well, the reason we have to vote on it is because we do not have this right under our law right now. We don't have the right to clean water. The quality of water is controlled for the large part by the state and federal government. And they tell industry how much pollution, how much pollution they can put in the water that heads down to the river that we're drinking out of with our wells, with our public wells and our private wells. They see, okay, up to a certain point, you can put this much in nitrates in the water, because up until the point where water gets to about 10 milligrams per liter of nitrates, it's not killing anybody. It's not killing small children, and it's not killing adults. But when it gets to 10 milligrams per liter, then it starts to kill babies and it kills older adults. Well, what we're saying in this, and what I hope that the voters in Orange County and the folks who are watching here and the folks that they talk to understand, is that is not acceptable. That is not an acceptable standard that we live under today, because our legislature that is writing the laws that are allowing this type of pollution into our waters is largely controlled by industry. They're largely controlled by the Florida Chamber of Commerce and Associated Industries of Florida, because they are very wealthy organizations of very large corporations that put in a lot of money to get candidates elected to public office. And once they're in public office, they write the laws that govern the pollution that's put into our water to the best interest of the industries that are funding the lobbyists and funding the campaigns of those people who control the quality of our water. So the next slide, please. The next slide says, what is a prohibition? What we're saying is it's a prohibition to violate the rights of both the river, the Wekiva River, the Econ-Lockhatchee, and all other waters, to pollute them, to cause them to be polluted. That becomes a violation of the Orange County Charter if this passes. Next slide, please. So because it creates this violation, and it is a violation of your health and my health both, when the levels of pollution in our water are such as they are today, where they're causing people to get sick, to develop cancers, we need to have the right to be able to go to some corporation or government that's purposely or negligently polluting our waters and bring in action against that company to get them to stop doing that. And again, you're going to say, well, Chuck, we have to have that right now. I mean, it's just common sense that somebody's polluting your water. If you have a well and somebody next door is dumping toxins in the water that's coming up into your well and it's making your whole family sick, that you should have the right. No, you don't have that right. You don't have that right under our existing law because that company or government that's next door, as long as they have a permit and they obtain this permit from the state, that you and I cannot do anything, bring action against them as long as they're operating within the parameters of their permit. So, for instance, in cases like the Water Conserve 2, they're allowed to put high nitrate water in excess of 10 milligrams per liter, such that it would directly serve to make sick and eventually kill a small child or an older person. They're allowed to put that into the ground as part of our groundwater. That's part of their permit. You and I could not sue Water Conserve 2 that's owned by the city of Orlando in Orange County. We can't do that because they're operating under a valid permit. Next slide, please. So you're going to start seeing these signs around town. We're putting them up in high traffic places. The right to clean water, vote yes on Charter Question 1, because we want people to know about this question and where you're going to be able to find it on your ballot. Usually charter questions are almost, if not will be, depending on where you're at, the last thing that you're going to see on your ballot. Now, you may be in a place that has, in a precinct that has something that's after this, but generally it's going to be at the bottom of your ballot. So it's very important that you look for it. You look for the 3 charter questions. This is Charter Question 1. Charter Question 2 is going to be about protecting split oak forest. And Charter Question 3 is a technical point about amending the charter by the petition process. So all 3 of these, if you take away anything from this podcast, I hope what you take away is to vote yes on all 3. Vote yes, certainly, to Charter Question 1, the right to clean water. Charter Question 2, split oak forest. Charter Question 3, enhancing the citizens initiative process in Orange County.
That is the end.
That's the end. That's the end. Well, let me tell you one last thing, Lee, is what our website is for this is right to cleanwater2020.com. So www.righttocleanwater2020.com. If you want to contact us directly, righttocleanwater2020@gmail.com. And, thank you so much, Lee, for giving us the opportunity to talk about this charter question and to try and explain it.
Of course, that was articulated so well. And I think if you were to survey the general public, most people would assume that we all have a right to clean, potable, unpolluted water. And, the fact that you're out there advocating for this, I think is really incredible. So thank you so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lee, and thank you for your constant and perpetual hard work on behalf of nature and the environment and and of the people of Central Florida. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows you and knows what you've done here, but for somebody of your age bracket, you have done, the work of a 200-year-old person.
Sometimes my body feels like it, I'll tell you that. Well, I actually have a couple questions here
Sure.
because, I just graduated with my bachelor's degree in environmental science around 2018. And something that I remember distinctly in my environmental economics class was the environmental costs of doing business and how certain corporations have protections in place to basically pollute and have it be even mitigating those costs is just the cost of doing business. Can you talk a little bit about some of those protections on the corporate ability to pollute and how that might be the reason why we're so late in the game in this pollution, how it's gotten this bad?
Yeah,
This bad. Those photos are incredible. How did it get so bad?
that's a great question. And to get to the heart of that question, we really have to go back to the formation of the United States and who was a person. Initially, we knew white men were persons, and then in the mid 1800s, there was a decision made by the Supreme Court. We had this guy on the Supreme Court who said, people are people, but corporations are people too. He was a railroad man. And so corporations became people under the eyes of the law. And if you go back to the Florida statutes and you look at Title I, Section 1, the word person includes individuals, children, and then we get into firms, associations, joint ventures, partnerships, trusts, business trusts, syndicates, fiduciaries, corporations, and all other groups or combinations. So now, because this ruling was made in the 1800s, where a corporation is now a person, that property, that permit that they have to pollute your water becomes an asset. That's property for them. And if a local government takes away their right to pollute, they're actually taking away property from that corporation. And, this is all a legal fiction that's been created to reinforce the situation that you just described. That why is it that this company that's next door to me is able to pour these toxins into a river that I'm drinking from, or into the groundwater that I'm pulling my drinking water from? It's because we have this system of law that enables corporations as people. And yet, and you and I, look, you and I and Ernest, we could get together and we could go on sunbiz.org right now and form a corporation. And in 5 minutes, that corporation would have more rights than all the rights of all the rivers in the state of Florida combined. Even though these rivers have been here for tens of thousands of years, and all the animals that live in the rivers have no rights. They are things under the law. So people say, oh, you have to strike a balance between commerce and preserving the environment. Well, what kind of balance do you have when a corporation has all the rights of a person and a river has absolutely no rights? So what we are trying to do here is everything that they've been telling me, and I'm sure they've been telling you for ages. Oh, you have to strike a balance. Okay, well, let's put the two on an equal footing where the river has certain rights and the corporation has certain rights, and then let that balance out.
And I'd have to say, because this is where, since this sounds like it's the first time that an amendment like this has even been proposed in Florida, my reference was from a video I watched on Lake Erie and how, the people there were getting sick for years, and we're bringing this up and we're basically chased out of courtrooms year after year saying that, they were making their science up and their studies and their data up. And now they finally are pushing for that same ruling. But when it comes down to holding these corporations accountable, I still feel like there will be obstacles when you compare the number of jobs, the growth and capacity of these corporations. And to be frank, and I don't mean to make this so broad, but for some reason, being an American has become a political tool to basically say, keep the government out of your business so you have the same right to grow your industry the same way your grandparents did and their grandparents did, and et cetera. Mm-hmm. And the more that we start to constrict people and hold them accountable and hold corporations accountable, the more that people start to politicize our natural resources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think, we wonder, well, how has it gotten to this point? You asked that question earlier. How have we gotten to this point? And I think it goes back to when Western Europeans first got to this country, and there was this myth of superabundance, that there are just too many trees and there was so much land, and you could just give away the land, and that's where the term dirt cheap comes from, because land was cheap and water was everywhere. And then we started to multiply and multiply and multiply. And now we've gotten to a different point in which, yes, I have a right to run a business, and I do run a business, but does my right to run a business supersede the health of you, of your future children, of your grandchildren? Does my right to make money supersede the lives of your grandparents? And we're starting to have to make these hard decisions, as we're making now, under cough, under the threat of COVID, right? We're seeing these daily. It's like, does a company have the right to open up and do business if it's going to affect the not only the livelihood but the lives of people around it? So because we've reached this point on the planet that every action is impacting your neighbor, people down the street, people in another state, people in another country, we've got to be responsible. We've got to weigh the action, that particular job, that we have to weigh commerce versus what its impact is on the state. We have in the state a massive phosphate mine company, Mosaic, that produces a lot of fertilizer, and it exports it around the world. They dig up the aquifer, they dig up the limestone from the aquifer, and they pulverize it, and they create phosphorus for fertilizers. And then what they don't use, the wastewater, they just dump in rivers like the Peace River. And how much, then there are people downstream from the Peace River, and there are people who eat the fish in the Peace River. and that dumps out eventually into Charlotte Harbor. What about those people? Do they have rights? Don't they have a right not to be put in a situation where they get cancer, or their spouses get cancer? So there is no real black and white on the issue between commerce and the preservation of the planet. We all know that we have to have commerce, but this is a start in the step to strike a balance between commerce and nature, and one that is, I think, essential to the preservation of the planet, and at least, at minimum, preservation to humans on the planet.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. What it sounds like is that there's basically, this is the first step in what sounds like three major steps of things that need to happen. First, just giving the rights to human beings to have access to clean water and to demand it, and also for water bodies in and of themselves to be protected from pollution. I, as a 29-year-old, assumed that as a society, day one of building a city would be, we need to protect our water, our natural resources for the people that live here, and that should be a priority. It also sounds like, we need to create incentives for greener businesses to, start businesses here in Florida to combat and mitigate some of these issues, very similarly to the renewable energy resources that are just kind of getting started here in the Sunshine State. Maybe instead of mining phosphorus, we could be sequestering some of these nitrates out of the water and figuring out a way to utilize those as a type of biofuel or a type of organic fertilizer, as opposed to allowing these septic tanks to just run rampant. And then third, it really sounds like there needs to be some level of accountability. At the end of the day, corporations have their hands in pockets of legislators, and it feels almost like that system of financial political gain is what has gotten us into this situation.
Yeah. And a part of that, in all throughout the three things that you just mentioned, there has to be a buildup of case law that once this passes, because this is just a law, a local charter amendment, that people like you and I can challenge those major companies that are polluting the water. And here's my hope, Lee, and this kind of ties into your second point, is my hope is that companies see this as a holstered gun that can be used by any citizen within Orange County, that they know that they're polluting water, they know what they're doing, they have a permit, but now citizens have a way of filing suit in Orange County against those polluters. So they now look at this and say, well, we could take this pollution out of the water before we inject it in the ground or put it into a river. But right now, it's not cost effective for them. They have a permit. It's easier for them to donate to a particular party and or a candidate that allows them to do that. And what we're talking about here is having something that gives them the incentive to hire somebody to build a plant or a system that cleans up their water before it's discharged. And as your third point, perhaps what they need to do is to pay into a system that cleans that water, whether it's naturally through planting aquatic plants that uptake these nitrates, or whether it's a mechanical system that takes that out of the water, that cleans it up. But with 21.5 million people in the state now, and all the agricultural fertilizer that's used, all the residential fertilizer, the wastewater and wastewater treatment facilities, and septic tanks, we got to start doing something differently. And this, I hope, is the start of that, of a new way of looking at things, where it's not just, okay, I have a permit, I'm going to pollute because I can. It's I can permit, but then I have all these citizens who are going to get on me about doing this pollution, about producing this pollution. So I think I need to clean up whatever it's clean up my act, right? Is a industrial polluter is doing now. Now, I will say that they have gone to great extent to try and kill this charter amendment. The Florida legislature passed a bill, and it was a huge 111-page bill, and within it is a few lines that try to preempt rights of nature and the right to clean water. So they're trying to stop it, and within the next few days, we'll know whether the governor vetoes the bill or he lets it just go into law. July 1st, it'll go into law, whether or not he signs it or not. But we are dead set on contesting that, as we certainly have the right to do, and we will see what happens there. We have an action to file in court if that goes through. But we are dead set on keeping this on the ballot in November and allowing the citizens of Orange County to be the first county citizens in the United States to vote on such a measure. You mentioned the Toledo. That was a city that voted on what they call LEBOR, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So this is a very large, Orange County is about 1.4 million population right now, which is, that's just crazy when you think about it. That's a lot of people packed into Orange County. So this is a very large county, and it's going to be up to us to set an example for the rest of the nation, and the rest of the nation will definitely be looking at this.
Well, that's a perfect note to end it on. So thank you so much for your time, and I will do my best to lift your voice in all your efforts. And thank you again for just sharing everything that you shared today.
All right. Thank you so much, Lee, and thanks again for having us and talking about this important issue today.
Of course. Thank you. And if you need anything from us, passing out signs, getting people to donate, we're going to be promoting this all the way through November. So please keep in touch.
Great. Thanks again.